Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is the FullSpeed ToothPick. Features the FullSpeed F411 flight controller with a 2 amp BEC, 12 amp 4-in-1 ESC, 1103 8000 kV motors, 65mm props, Caddx Micro F2 camera, FullSpeed TX600 power switchable from 25 milliwatts all the way up to 600 milliwatts. XT30 for your battery connection. It comes with a single battery strap. Mine has an FrSky D8 receiver. It weighs a little over 44 grams. Bottom plate looks like it's 1.5 millimeters. Motor post to motor post I'm getting 120 millimeters. We do have a slight breeze. Oddly enough, it is shaking the machine around on the table that I usually fly from, and that's because the battery kind of sits cockeyed in there. We've got a couple of screws at the bottom, and we'll take a look at that. They kind of force us with the flat mounting surface that they have to mount the battery kind of diagonally across the base of the frame. Also, when you see kind of a quick twitch in hard yaw turns, I think that's either a prop slipping or something else is going on. Maybe we've got some vibration buildup and the FC isn't handling that very well. I don't know for sure, but I did swap out the props. I even used some floss on the props. For the most part, it flew pretty well. I kind of flew around that, but it's something to note if you see it in the flight footage that it does kind of snap in hard yaw turns, actually using quite a bit of rudder on that as well, or roll in those turns due to the camera angle. You know, our quads are nose down, so we have some yaw and some roll as we coordinate into those turns. Just wanted to bring that to your attention. Make sure I'm not trying to cover anything up. In the flight that I am showing you, I am using the TinyWhoop 3S 333 milliamp battery. Those are fairly expensive batteries. For those that haven't looked into those batteries, you can only get those, I believe, from tinywhoop.com. Unless you live in Germany, then I think you can get those from mylipo.de. I did fly it on 2S, and I'll show you a bit of that footage. And for me, 2S just wasn't there for me. I felt with 2S I had all sorts of recovering problems when I would do any sort of maneuver where I was losing altitude and then I needed to stop that loss of altitude to recover, that I oftentimes ended up in grass. Matter of fact, the segment I'm going to show you is only about a minute long, because what happened repeatedly, and after a while I got to thinking, you know, it's fine for cruising if you don't do any elevation loss flying maneuvers, but I think if you're going to fly on 2S a lot, that you probably want to avoid that sort of thing. Otherwise, you need to get yourself some 3S batteries if you don't have them, and fly more aggressively with 3S. Also, from time to time in the flights, and I noticed this across all my flights, is that you will see kind of a bobbling in the camera, and I think that has to do with the 3D print and the single screw that is mounted through the frame. I would prefer to see 2 screws, because that helps stabilize that mount. They chose to use 1, so from time to time I did notice kind of a bobbling. I am using their default tune for the flights. It does come with the tune. You may feel the tune suits you, you may feel it doesn't, but I wanted to show you the flight in the default tune. A lot of people appreciate when it comes with a tune already, and FullSpeed has done that. I think one of the biggest advantages to this style and this category is that you have all these different components. So if you do have a crash and or a failure of a component, that you don't have to replace everything like we traditionally do with the all-in-one boards. Any one piece stopped working and you have to replace the whole thing. In this case, if you have a flight controller or an OSD issue, then you can replace the flight controller itself. If you have an ESC issue, you can just replace the ESC. The camera is also can be an advantage for some. This has a more standard micro FPV camera in it. You know, we've seen these quite a few times before. In this particular flight, I don't see any smudges or dust underneath the lens, but the Caddx cameras do have a tendency to have some sort of dirt or something underneath the lens, and to get it out you have to take the lens off and then blow some air or something of that nature. Don't blow hard on that sensor, just a little puff to try to get that dust or dirt out of there. I noticed in mine that it moved around my first, I don't know, dozen flights, that the particle that I had would move from the upper part of the screen to the lower part of the screen, and you may still see it in here, but I'm not seeing it. It might be a different piece. But it was pretty predominant. It was a dark spot that was relatively in the center of the screen when I noticed it. This is our 2S flight. We're only going to see about a minute of this, and at first you might think everything's fine, but it's that low end response that we just don't get from this on 2S. I think at this weight, with the motors and the props that we're running on this, I needed more response. Maybe you will be able to handle it just fine, but you'll notice in this, when I go to recover, I don't quite pull it off. I don't jam the throttle hard enough in order to keep from going into the grass. Of course, the grass is going to keep us in these little tiny models for the most part from being able to turtle mode and continue on. So if you land upside down, I would be cautious about using turtle mode. Make sure your props can spin, because if they can't and you jam the throttle, you may end up with a problem. We do have a beefier ESC in this particular case that should handle that a little bit better than we did on the 5 amp all-in-one ESC boards. So here in a minute, I'm going to do just kind of a minor maneuver, kind of pump up over the shed and kind of nose down and then look down, and then I'm going to go right into the grass. I don't recover quite as I normally did. And this is about the time where I decided, okay, 2S is not for me. It might be for you, but it's not for me. So I concentrated on 3S with the remainder of my flights. For those that may not be familiar, this is the particular battery, so you have a visual representation of what battery I was flying. It's a little bit longer than what you normally find. It's basically 3 1S sticks inside. You can also find the 1S sticks that are 333 milliamp from tinywhoop.com, and you see right there it's mylipo.de, but tinywhoop.com sells them in the US. Beans already talked about it, I want to highlight it. This is the single screw that mounts your canopy. You saw it there. And we do get some wiggle and play in that. You can kind of see the edges here at the lower, well, let me get my finger forward here. At the lower part, if we just wiggle that, I'm not putting much stress or tension on that. So my preference would be that we see 2 spots. Maybe the height and the camera create a problem with doing that, but I would like to see 2 spots mounting the camera canopy or the canopy itself down. It has the traditional style that we've been seeing from Full Speed. We also have connectors, and you'll also notice that those connectors have some black extensions for the motor wires. They're reusing the motors that we saw on the tiny leader, so they're the same motors that we saw there. I did end up with a prop strike. That is the picture that you're looking at, because initially these do not come secured down, and I do find that there's plenty of length, especially in the front 2 motors, for those to work up and get into the props, which mine did. So I used some electrical tape to tape them down. Thankfully, in my prop strike, I did not have any gross severing of the motor wire, so I didn't have to repair that. It was just the insulation was cut. I also chose to put a zip tie securing my battery lead, because this mounting just doesn't work very well at all. It's actually kind of bad. Pretty much any time you go down or hit something, the battery at very least shifts forward, and depending upon the length of the lead, it may shift all the way out forward, and then you have to massage the battery back in. Another thing that I noticed is when it didn't go all the way out, that I would try to take off again if I happened to land right side up, and I could feel it, of course, on the sticks that something wasn't right, so I would just fly it over to me and I would correct that. Also, the screws that they use to mount the motors are all Phillips head. I would prefer to see hex, because they're easier to manage, I believe, and you're less likely to strip out a hex head than you are a Phillips head. So that's something else I think that could be improved. As far as the strap that we were talking about, let me pull this back so you can see. There's really nothing for us to really hold on to. This felt is pretty slick. If you have a rubberized strap, I would highly recommend you using that, because it will hold onto your battery a lot more. Also, the VTX is right down here to the bottom plate, and the footage that I'm showing you over here is just me practicing. It's kind of that point where I had already flown enough to where I figured I've got to have a couple of flights that are fair enough to where I can use them in a review, and then I'm just kind of playing and practicing and maybe doing something new, or just trying to have some additional fun with it, you know, burning through the packs that are left, so to speak. But this strap, I would like to see an improvement, and I think they could have made an improvement relatively easily. And these are the screws that kind of keep you from being able to mount your battery straight this way. It ends up getting a little bit cockeyed like this. If we look here at the side, we have space in our flight stack above, so they could have raised this VTX and the ESC and the flight stack all up a little bit, enough to get a strap all the way through. I would rather have the strap all the way through so we can use some sort of thin gummy pad there. That would have given us quite a bit more security for our battery than this felt on this zip tie does. These just, and they're hard to get much tension on as well. So those are some things I think they could have improved. They could have just added a nylon nut to the base of this and pushed everything up. Speaking of how things are mounted, let me get this out of the way. You see there's no nylon here between the flight controller and the ESC, and the same can be said for this over here. So while this isn't a problem, it's not going to move much, you do want to make sure that the 2 primary screws from your flight controller are secured down so it doesn't wobble in flight. The VTX button is right here, and to unlock that you have to press that for 20 seconds, so kind of count slowly. and you'll see some additional lights flashing. It's pretty difficult to see that under there. So one way to check is to go into your OSD, and then under the features, and then in the smart audio, to change the milliwatt setting to whatever you want it to, and then make sure you set it, and then you save on your way out of the OSD, unplug it, plug it back in, go back into the OSD, the features, the smart audio, and see what it's set to, because if it's not unlocked, it will go right back to 25 milliwatts through the OSD. You can use button presses to change that. I don't recommend that, though. We have the OSD. It's a whole lot simpler. And if you're using something metal while you're plugged in, it concerns me, because there's an opportunity to slip, and then you touch two opposing a 5 volt in the ground, and then you've got a short, and you're using something metal. If you're going to do that, I recommend using something plastic. I've got a little brush from the kids that I filed that edge down. It's come in real handy when I did need to touch something when it was plugging in. So you have to do that initially, count to 20 seconds. Also, the receiver up here, let's see if I can get that wiggled out. You'll notice some of these wires are kind of loose in here. I would prefer to have this secured down. For review purposes, I left it out. So hopefully you'll be able to see this on the receiver. There's our little button. So you press and hold that while you plug in a battery, and it will go into binding mode. Then you bind in D8 on FrSky. I use a lump of my blue tack. I stick it down on my desk. I put this here, so that gives me the ability to hold this button and plug in a battery, and then I can put it into binding mode. That's pretty much how I do all of them. I generally always use this blue tack unless I'm using Spectrum, and then I can use the CLI, and I can put it into binding mode there. I highly recommend you secure the wires down. This one's going to come by default if you buy it with a receiver secured down with that zip tie, but I highly recommend you secure the rest of these down, because as you'll see, we've got some play in here. This comes out quite a ways here, and so if you've got that much play, look how high that can get here. There's going to be some variable in the assembly process, but if you can imagine this amount getting out over here, we've got a pretty good opportunity for a prop strike, because even if you start out with it tucked away all nice and neat, when you take off and you get to doing whatever maneuvers you're doing, it's very likely that one or both of those front wires can come out. These rear ones are a little bit less likely because there's less slack in the line, but still there's a good, I would say maybe close to a ½ inch that could come out, so that could still come up into harm's way. So something to be careful with there. They did use hex screws here, but I had problems getting my camera angle to stay put. Oftentimes with a crash, I would find that it would go back down. It does go up, but I can't get it above this. This seems to be the maximum height, and it's probably because the connector is hitting the flight control board right back here. So something to be aware of is that you've got a couple of millimeters of camera angle that I can't seem to get with how mine's set up and have been assembled. When I got done flying this and kind of sitting down and thinking about everything that I'd experienced with this, I couldn't help but think that this is different than what I think the category is. When we see others like the Primo and the Carrera and the ToothPick and what others have we? There's the Pickle. That's another one. There's a number of these like ultra micro light builds out there that run 2 and 3S. This one seems to be kind of on the maybe the tail end of that. I really don't see it as a micro ultralight. I kind of looked at this and I thought, the Leader 120. Remember the original Leader 120? If you haven't been around long enough in FPV to remember the Leader 120, and you're looking at this, I would say you should also give the Leader 120 a go, because that one runs more traditional props. It's got a little larger motor. You'll be able to do more maneuvers with this, with the Leader 120, than you would with this. I felt like the Leader 120 kind of flew better, but then again, it's using older tech. It is a year and a half, maybe 2 years old. But I think if I were choosing between the two, for me, I would go with the Leader 120. The original Leader 120. I don't mind those all-in-one cameras, but if you're someone who really wants individual components, you want a power switchable VTX and go all the way up to 600 milliwatts, and you want a camera that's more standard for FPV, then this is a candidate you need to look at. But again, I would encourage you to also look at the Leader 120. The Leader 120 was a wildly popular quad. It just kind of doesn't get its due anymore because of its age. I still have mine, and I suspect many of you that have been around a while still have yours. Hopefully you're still flying it and having fun. But between the two, I think I would go with the Leader 120. But again, as I've already pointed out, there are some differences here that you may want. Last thing we'll take a look at is the frame of the carbon. Some of you like to look at that, so you can see whether you see cross-hatching or not. Also, the flexibility of the frame. I try to do this for you most of the time. This is only 1.5 millimeters, so it's relatively flexible. I didn't think it caused a problem in flight, but you may feel differently about that. I should mention also the motors. They have 1.5 millimeter prop shafts, so it's very unlikely these particular motors will bend nearly as easy as their 1 millimeter counterparts, which we've seen a lot of motors come out that have a 1 millimeter motor shaft, and they do tend to get bent. So that is a benefit. You know, you're running a bigger motor shaft, so it should be more durable. You also note that I didn't go through anything in the box, but to my knowledge, all you get is one set of props and the battery strap. That's all that comes in the box. There's no battery that comes with it, no extras, anything of that nature. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.